What you're looking at is an abandoned building in Nitro, West Virginia. Originally, this was the local high school, later turned into a community center and a daycare. Now, a few years post the pandemic, the businesses inside have relocated and the building sits empty. I know this building looks pretty ordinary, but what if I told you that this was the location of the first ever human cloning lab?
That these new animal cloning techniques can be used to create a child.
Before we embark on this journey, I need to introduce the main character, Mark Hunt. He is a lawyer and politician who is currently a member of the West Virginia legislature serving as a local senator of District 8.
I am a son of West Virginia, born here, educated here. My wife and I raised our family here. I know what it's like to be a West Virginian.
Just recently, he announced in January of 2024 that he is running for West Virginia State Auditor. Ironically enough, one of his platforms on his website is, "Don't we need a 30-year public servant without a hint of scandal protecting the public trust?" Although what we're about to talk about, in my personal opinion, is more of a crazy story rather than a reason to not trust a politician, I would still say that it counts as a scandal, since the definition of a scandal is literally an action or event regarded as morally or legally wrong and causing general public outrage. And as you will see, that is exactly what happened here. Now for this story, we are going to be talking about an interesting time around the turn of the century when the possibility of cloning humans was right around the corner. I know, this already sounds a little crazy, but as you saw from the intro, it's all legit. Scientists had been trying to clone animals since the late 70s, and in 1996, they finally reached success. After 276 failed attempts, Dolly the lamb was cloned by a group of Scottish scientists. This was a huge milestone in science and was opening the door for many medical possibilities. But for Mark Hunt and his wife Tracy, this was a miracle. In 1999, Mark and Tracy lost their 10-month-old son Andrew to open heart surgery failure. As you could imagine, they were completely grief-stricken. The couple filed a wrongful death lawsuit against West Virginia University Hospitals, the West Virginia University's Board of Trustees, and the surgeon, Dr. Robert Gustafson. They settled in Kanawha County Circuit Court for $370,000, and with that, they were able to pursue their options and what they thought was a possibility in cloning their late son. With the scientific breakthrough of Dolly being cloned, the Hunts had preserved some of Andrew's cells and set out on a mission. Mark claimed that he had traveled all over, talking to many different scientists to get his plan off of the ground. With a little luck, he finally landed on a website called Clonaid, who offered to clone a loved one for as little as $200,000. Now, before we go any further, we have to talk about the people behind Clonaid. It does get really weird, and I'm not going to be doing a complete deep dive on them, but essentially, Clonaid is a project, or I guess a brand, by a religion, or some would call a cult, called the Raelian movement. The Raelian movement claims that life on Earth was created scientifically in laboratories by extraterrestrials, and they call themselves the Elohim. They claim that this name is found in the Hebrew Bible, but it was mistranslated to the word God rather than those who come from the sky. The movement also claims that Jesus' resurrection was, in fact, a cloning performed by the Elohim. And where do they get this information? Well, the story goes that an alien traveled to Earth to find a man named Claude Vourhalon, and they relayed all of this info to him. The alien said that it was his mission to pass this information on to the people of Earth. Now, Claude was a race car magazine journalist, but after the alien encounter, he changed his name to Rael, which means the messenger of the Elohim, and he eventually stopped writing for his magazine and devoted his life to his mission, assigned to him by the aliens, and created the International Raelian Movement, and that is the really condensed version of who these people are. So back to Clonaid. Clonaid is a service that is still today offered by the Raelians, or at least the website is still up. The email contact doesn't really seem to work, and I also couldn't find any current pricing, but the website to this day is still functional. Thanks to the Wayback Machine, we can see what it looked like when Mark Hunt was searching for a way to clone Andrew. Rael had handed over the operations to the French chemist and the Raelian bishop named Dr. Bridget Boslier. The archived Clonaid pages shows us that they offered two services. The first service was to clone a loved one for as little as $200,000, and the second service was called Insure a Clone, where they would store living cells for future use for $50,000. With Hunt wanting to use the cloning services, he met with Dr. Boslier, and together they formed a company called Bioserve Incorporated, and this will be important later. Hunt was the financial investor where he supplied a lab, bought equipment, and paid the scientists. From articles that have came out, we know that he paid at least $200,000 to Clonaid for the cloning service, $5,000 a month to the scientist, he bought the equipment, and he rented a lab for $347.58 a month. Hunt claims that he spent less than $500,000 altogether. But let's get back to this lab he was able to rent out for $347.58 a month. That seems a little cheap, even for 23 years ago. But this is where things get a little interesting. Instead of getting a pristine, fancy lab, Hunt and Dr. Boslier set up camp in an old high school science classroom in the upstairs of a community center in Nitro, West Virginia. This particular community center actually housed a Christian daycare on the lower level. This lab was very much a secret operation. Because the public opinion of human cloning was not a good one, many countries had made human cloning illegal, and the US was needing to decide on legislation after the success of cloning Dolly. This is what President Clinton has said on the matter.
Nothing makes the necessity of that moral obligation more clear than the troubling possibility that these new animal cloning techniques could be used to create a child. That is why I acted in March to ban the use of federal funds for cloning human beings and to urge the private sector to observe the ban voluntarily while we initiated a national dialogue on the risks and the responsibilities of such a possibility. Today, I am sending legislation to the Congress that prohibits anyone in either public or private sectors from using these techniques to create a child.
So this was 2 years before the death of Andrew Hunt. It pretty much set the political climate on the subject of human cloning all across the United States. President Clinton proposed legislation for anti-human cloning, but it actually never passed. In 2001, where our current story is taking place, President Bush wanted to ban human cloning as well. He held a congressional hearing on the matter, and Dr. Boslier attended to read a letter written anonymously by Mark Hunt himself. The letter starts out, "Dear Chairman Greenwood, who am I and why do I support human cloning? I am a successful attorney, a former state legislator, a current elected official, a husband, a son, a brother, but most importantly, I am a father." He goes on to mention the death of his child and how he intended to create a healthy duplicate, a twin, of his son. He mentions how he saved the appropriate cells from Andrew's body and that he studied, read, traveled, and wrote letters and called scientists all over the world, sparing no expense or commitment to his child. As months passed, Dr. Boslier had been getting a lot of attention with the news. Clonaid was promising to be able to produce the first human clone, and they wouldn't reveal where their secret lab was. Public opinions on cloning were very strong at this time, with the majority of people outraged at the thought of someone playing God themselves. Eventually, the public was getting very curious about the location of the lab, so much so that the Sunday Times of London asked an investigative reporter named Joe Lauria to track it down. And he did. And here's what he has to say about it.
Well, on July 4th, the Sunday Times of London called me and asked me to find Bridget Boiselier's secret cloning lab. She had left enormous clues in her testimony before the subcommittee of the House in March, when the House was looking to get evidence for the bill they eventually passed to ban cloning. She talked about Her secret investor who had lost his son in a hospital mishap. He had a hole in his heart. He died in surgery. He won a malpractice suit. She even released a letter with her testimony from this man, said that he was a local legislator, a successful lawyer, and that he wanted to get his son back. With those clues in hand, I flew out to Las Vegas to meet with Bridget for an hour interview in Vegas where she lives. I then went up to Syracuse, near where she was teaching. There had been some thought that maybe the lab was there. I thought perhaps it was in the desert of Nevada. Those clues, those leads ran cold. Eventually, I did some very hard work, database searches and interviewing, and I came across a story eventually, after about a month's work, in a database in a Charleston, West Virginia newspaper, September 1999, about a politician who had lost his son in a hospital mishap. He had a hole in the heart. He died on his operating table. He won a malpractice suit, and all the clues seemed to fit. I thought I had the man then. Next, it was finding the lab. So I went down to Charleston, and I had a few places I went to I thought it might have been, and that wasn't the case. I came back to New York. I found a company called Bioserve Inc. She had said on her website that she created a secret company as well to do this, apart from Clonaid, which is the overall company that she's the scientific director of. And Bioserve Inc. is in the phone directory. It's in the phone book of Charleston. I rang the building manager there, and I chatted with him and asked if there was a lab in the building, and he said indeed there was, and he volunteered the information without me even asking him to tell me. He asked me, do you know who rented the lab? And I said no, and he said Mark Hunt, the politician. Well, I thought that was it. I knew I had the story at that point.
Okay, so remember, I said pay attention to the name Bioserve Inc. That essentially was their downfall. That was a company that they created to do the cloning. She had mentioned it on the website, so it became public information. She went to the congressional hearing with this letter. It gave quite a bit of detailing information that was able to point him to Mark Hunt. The Bioserve Inc. had a West Virginia number. He called it, and then he got extremely lucky that a very chatty, true, friendly West Virginian answered the phone and just overindulged a bit too much gossip and was able to find the lab, a very non-sterile lab in a community center old high school classroom. It's just iconic that that's how it ends. With the news out, the project started to have some problems. The FDA approached Hunt because they were concerned that a human was about to be cloned in this community center. Hunt assured them that the scientists were only supposed to be examining his son's cells to see if they were even able to be cloned. The Christian daycare in the building was facing a lot of backlash as well. Parents were not wanting to bring their children, knowing that a cloning lab was right above them. It also presented a safety concern. If people get angry enough to bomb abortion clinics, who is to say a bombing attempt wouldn't be made on a cloning lab? The last straw was when Dr. Bosley went on an interview and said they were 6 weeks away from a human clone, and the FDA asked Hunt if he had lied to them. He locked the doors and said he was cutting ties with Dr. Bosley because she had become quite a press hog. So the Hunts were never able to clone their son, but they had 2 other children, and Mark Hunt's political career was never affected by the incident. In fact, opponents never brought it up because people would tend to be sympathetic to the loss of a child. The Raelians are still a thing, and allegedly they cloned a human in 2003. So let me know in the comments below, did you know the first human cloning lab was in an old high school science classroom? Do you think the Raelians were legit, or just taking advantage of grieving parents? Thank you so much for watching. If you watched this all the way through, I hope it was interesting, and I'll catch you next time. Bye!